Matt Olson, Marcus Semien, Zach Gallen. What do they all have in common? They were bad in 2024. Well, actually, they kind of let us down. They weren't completely bad, but they let us down based on where they were drafted. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, December 5th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. We finished up all our position recaps. So today on the show, we are evaluating 15 bounce back candidates. We got some news. Aroldis Chapman signed with the Red Sox, and the talk of the baseball world, not Juan Soto, the golden at bat. Do you love it? Do you hate it? We'll talk about it. Anyway, let's start with the bounce back candidates. So I looked at players being drafted in the top 5 rounds last year, top 60 picks in ADP, who had down seasons, and as a result, they are being drafted later, entering 2025, and in some cases, much later than they were being drafted last year. I didn't include guys like Julio Rodriguez and Corbin Carroll because they're still borderline first-round picks. I think, in general, we expect those guys to bounce back. And let's add a wrinkle here. The bounce-back-o-meter. 1 means this player virtually has no chance of bouncing back, and 10 means you are completely confident they will bounce back in 2025. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right.
I had to get ready for a second, but I think I'm there.
All right, Scott. Well, you better be ready because we are starting with your Atlanta Braves, a trio. We can honestly talk about almost the entire Braves lineup. Lots of letdowns in 2024, but the trio of Matt Olson, Austin Riley, and Ozzie Albies. So Matt Olson's ADP last season was 15, early second round pick, borderline first, second round pick. His early ADP for 2025 is 34. So it's not a huge fall, but when a player drops 2 rounds that early in the draft, it matters, obviously, from one year to the next. So Olson has kind of had this like reverse Aaron Nola thing going on. He had this weird, odd, even year thing. He has monster seasons in odd years. He lets us down in even years. I don't think that there's anything actually to that, but it does happen. He went from being the number 2 player in fantasy in 2023 all the way down to 65th this past season. So I think that's the floor versus the ceiling. Scott, we will start with you. What are the chances of Matt Olson bouncing back 1 to 10?
I would put the chances of him bouncing back at, let's say 7. It's kind of hard before we've calibrated this meter to know exactly what the numbers mean, but 7 sounds about right. Between 7 and 8. Let's say 7.5 for Matt Olson.
I mean, the thing to keep in mind, and I just did this exercise for the newsletter tomorrow with some pitchers, and the numbers don't mean anything.
Well, they should mean something relative to each other, right?
Personally, I think the chances of Matt Olson bouncing back to being the number 2 player in fantasy are basically 0. Like I would say that's a 1.
Okay.
Bouncing back to what he was in, like, the problem is 2024 wasn't that different from 2022.
Are we going to get the good Matt Olson or the bad Matt Olson is how I was approaching this.
The 30 homer 250 hitting version or the 35 to 40 homer 270 hitting version. I think that, I'm with you on a 7 on the latter, but he is 31 or will be 31. I don't know when his birthday is. It's in March, right after opening day, 2 days after opening day, I believe. He got a little bit worse at basically everything in 2024. Didn't hit the ball quite as hard, struck out a little bit more, walked actually a significant amount less. That we care less about that. But it is to say that unlike Michael Harris and Austin Riley, and I don't know about Ozzie Albies, actually. I haven't looked that as deep into that one yet, but like Austin Riley and Michael Harris, their quality of contact numbers, their underlying stuff looks almost identical to 2023. There was very little difference in the skill set for those 2 guys. So I'm very confident that Austin Riley and Michael Harris are going to bounce back. I'm buying those. Matt Olson, it's always been a volatile skill set. There's always been a lot of swing and miss. There's been a little bit of fluctuation in the quality of contact from one year to the next. And so it's always been the case that you just don't know what you get from Matt Olson. That makes it harder to be confident in the bounce back. But I'm pretty confident that Matt Olson's going to be very, very good.
Well, I think the most encouraging thing, the main thing to cling to here with Matt Olson is just that we've seen this from him before, more than once, in fact, where we think he's an out-and-out stud, and then he follows it up with a year where he just seems kind of lost all year, but then comes on strong late and manages to salvage his numbers, make them at least respectable as he did this past year. Final 47 games, Matt Olson hit .295 with a .964 OPS.
It's not that much different than 2023.
Much lower strikeout rate, which usually accompanies Matt Olson's stretches. So I think he just gets, I think he's just a really a fussy kind of hitter that it doesn't take much to make him spiral, but like the tools are there for him to be a top 5 power hitter in the game. And I don't see any reason to believe that skill is diminished. And so it's just, is he going to have another one of those years where he's kind of struggling to get right, or is he going to find that earlier this year, maybe even from the get-go? And that's impossible to predict. But there is 50 homer upside. And the good thing is the downside is like 30 homers.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good time to invest in him. Not that people have totally like abandoned ship and his draft stock is at an all-time low or anything like that, but it's certainly lower than last year, and hard for him not to live up to it.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the early ADP for Matt Olson is 34, so a late third-round pick in a 12-team league, and I agree, around a 7 on the bounce-back-o-meter I think makes sense, expecting something like, 260, 35 to 40 home runs, really good counting stats. I think that's a pretty fair projection for Matt Olson. What about Austin Riley? Chris, you already shared your thoughts. You sound confident in this bounce back. The ADP last year was 19. It's dropped down to 31, so not a huge drop, but we're into the middle of the third round. He got off to a really slow start, but from June on, he hit 275 with 16 home runs and 870 OPS. Quality of contact still looked amazing. His season unfortunately ended with a fractured right hand in August, but he's in the prime of his career. 2021 through 2023 were basically identical years. Chris, what's the number for you? Is it a 10 that Austin Riley just gets back to that level?
I don't think I'm going to give out any 10s. That's hard. That means I'm 100% confident, and I'm not 100% confident in anything.
So Heath,
there was a player
Cummings on the fantasy football podcast. Doesn't he only give out 10s and 1s? Isn't that all he does?
Yeah,
so you're going to the other extreme.
I'm
impossible
gonna be
to earn
a little more nuanced than that. But it's a 9. Like 2021, he had a 366 xWOBA. 2022, he had a 378 xWOBA. 2023, he had a 365 xWOBA. 2024, he has 361. It's basically like my read on Austin Riley is he had a bad April. Nothing really concerning about it. He was just bad. And he had that oblique injury in May. Remember, he never went on the IL, but he missed like 2 weeks as a result of it. Then he came back, kind of scuffled again for a couple of weeks. On June 14th, I believe it was, he homered for the first, in the first of what was 3 consecutive games with a homer. And from that point on, he was on a 45 homer pace with a 292 batting average until he fractured his hand. I see absolutely nothing to be concerned about with Austin Riley. Scott, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine you are right there with me.
Yeah, my read on Austin Riley, it's a similar one to Julio Rodriguez, actually, where we're used to seeing the slow starts from him, and then he catches fire midseason, and the numbers end up MVP caliber or close to it. And I think sort of like with Julio Rodriguez last year, he happened to suffer this injury during that point in the year when he's normally making up all the ground. And so the final numbers aren't where we're used to seeing him. But I think Austin Riley is fundamentally the same player we've been taking in round 2 the past couple years. And if he goes much later than that, I think you should attack.
In a vacuum, who would you guys rather draft in the third round, Austin Riley or Matt Olson?
Riley, because I'm going 10 for Riley. I'm going to go 10 for Riley versus 7.5 for Olson.
I'm with you, Scott. I think at 10. I have complete confidence that Austin Riley is just going to go back.
Leaving a little room for uncertainty.
Come on. Come on.
That's not fun.
I'm not trying to be fun, you know?
Okay. I respect that. Fun is overrated.
Yeah, exactly what we want to say on a podcast. Come on, guys. Ozzie Albies, let's talk about him. His ADP last year was 23. It dropped down to 52 so far heading into next season. And Albies feels like another player where you draft him coming off these injury-riddled down seasons and you profit. We've seen this before. He had an injury-marred 2022. Awesome 2023. I don't think he gets all the way back to that 2023 level because that was truly a special year. But, you know, he missed time this past season with a fractured right toe, a fractured left wrist. Kind of just feels like fluky stuff for him. He'll be 28 years old in January. It's the prime of his career. Scott, what do you think the chances of Ozzie Albies bouncing back, not to 2023 levels, but let's say, you know, 270 hitter, 25 home runs, 15 steals, that kind of median projection, something we expect out of Ozzie Albies?
Yeah, I think that's probably what you should expect. He's 27 years old. Apart from those 2 years where broken bones got the better of him, he's basically always delivered on that. The one little bit of hesitation, and I hesitate to say it even because I don't want to discourage people from drafting Ozzie Albies where they're likely to get him, is that those 2 years where he had a couple broken bones and missed significant time and the numbers were down were also the 2 years where the ball wasn't carrying as well. And there's always been a lot of blue on that StatCast page, and you wonder, is Ozzie Albies more vulnerable? But that, like, he sells out pretty hard for home runs with his approach, especially from the left side. And would a deader ball, if we get that this year, and he stays healthy, would it lead to a very disappointing season? So that's the only hesitation with Ozzie Albies. That's the only reason why I'm going to go with just an 8 here. But I think given the consistency of his career, the fact he's still in the prime of his career, the fact that his injuries were of a fluky nature, the fact that second base is so weak, I'm just going to ignore those 2 points left on the table. And I'm very high on drafting Ozzie Albies this year.
I will probably go more like a 6. I'm debating still whether I want him to be my number 4 second baseman or my number 5. Because the one thing I will say is among the top 5 at second base, and I'm debating him versus Marcus Semien, who we're going to talk about a little later. The one thing is I feel like Ozzie Albies has the most fragile skill set of that group. Mookie Betts, Ketel Marte, Jose Altuve, Marcus Semien, and Ozzie Albies are that top 5. And it's because of what Scott said. There have been Ozzie Albies he's been in the majors for 8 years, but he's played 7 seasons from start to finish, not counting injuries. 2 of those seasons have seen a home run to fly ball ratio below 12% league wide. And those are the 2 bad years for Ozzie Albies. And it might just be that he is a little more, that the margin for error here is very, very slim. And in a deader ball era or a deader ball season, he might just be a little more prone to disappointing. And that's also true of Marcus Semien, right? His only 2 bad seasons in the past 5 were also 2022 and 2024. And it's a very similar skill set. The difference is
Altuve has the not very high quality contact thing going for him too. So
he's
even
just managed to make it work.
Second base are all like that. Altuve obviously has the park that is like perfectly suited for his approach. But anyway, go ahead.
But I think the bigger difference is, and maybe I don't know. Like, I feel like Semien, one, has just shown a higher floor for the homers. You know, he's hit 26 and 23 in the 2 bad years. And it's just because of where he hits in the lineup, because he just never misses a game. Like, he's missed 4 games in the past 5 years, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Four in the last 4 years. It does feel like there are fewer ways for things to go wrong for Semien than Albies, but that's also, one of them's 34, one of them's 28. So
Right.
I don't know how true that actually is. Yeah.
That's the bigger variable for me. I get what you're saying, where it's
assuming they're
if we're presuming no age-related decline,
exactly,
there's probably a higher floor for Semien than Albies, slightly, but there's 7 years difference here.
Yeah.
So I'd want to protect against the age-related decline.
I'm betting on the Albies bounce back, but where that actually lands and whether I'm actually likely to draft him, I've kind of not been like an Albies drafter over the years anyway. So that might just be
numbers.
Continuing. What's that?
You missed out on a lot of numbers.
Yeah, in the good years for sure. Yeah.
All right, we are going to talk about Marcus Semien a little bit more in just a bit, but we got to take our first break. Before we do that, Chris mentioned he wrote about this in his newsletter. Make sure to sign up for said newsletter at cbssports.com/newsletters or scan the QR code if you're watching on YouTube, and you can sign up for free. Let's take our first break. When we return, we talk about Marcus Semien right after this.
Historic rivals with unforgettable seasons meet in a game of honor. The Army-Navy game presented by USAA, December 14th on CBS.
So Marcus Semien's ADP last year was 29. It's all the way down to 90. There's almost a 40 pick difference between where Semien and Albies are being drafted right now. Obviously, the batting average, OPS were both really bad. His lowest since 2020. The stolen bases continue to drop for Marcus Semien, but you look under the hood, there's not really that much that's different. You guys kind of broke it down. You mentioned the age here. Chris, we'll start with you. Where are you at on the bounce back meter specifically for Marcus Semien?
Well, as I said, I'm waffling on Semien versus Albies, which means I'm either way lower on Albies than the consensus or way higher on Semien than the consensus. And I'm way higher on Semien than the consensus. He's in that 55-ish range along with Albies. I don't know, man. If like your disaster, everything went wrong, oh no, things are falling apart season still ends with 101 runs, 23 homers, 74 RBI, and 8 stolen bases, like that's pretty awesome. I know the batting average was bad, and look, maybe the batting average might be a liability moving forward. I think that's perfectly reasonable, but there wasn't much reason to think that there was a huge skills-based decline for Marcus Semien. I tend to think, I'm going to go with like a 7. I'm a little more confident that he bounces not all the way back, because when Marcus Semien is right, he's been a top 5 player in fantasy. I don't think he gets back to that, but bouncing back to 2023 in, like with the Braves, a Rangers lineup that I do expect to be much better in 2025 than it was in 2024. I'm pretty confident, and I'm going to end up drafting Marcus Semien a lot this year, I think.
So I'm also going 7, but since our meters are maybe calibrated a little differently here, I'll point out that 7 is the lowest score I've handed out so far.
Is that the age?
Well, it's not just the age. The age is part of it. 34 again, Marcus Semien. But he struck out just as infrequently. He hit the ball just as hard. There wasn't, beyond just the top line performance, there wasn't a lot of signs of age-related decline there. Sometimes those signs aren't so visible. But since they aren't visible, it's not like I feel confident Semien's just gotten old. But here's the thing. Stolen bases.
Yeah.
Last 3 years, 25, 14, 8. So you mentioned Marcus Semien might just be a liability in batting average now. Hit 237 this year. Has hit below 250 3 of the past 5 years. I think it's fair to say he probably is a liability in batting average, certainly for the range he's going to be drafted. If he's a liability in stolen bases also, and you get a lot of stolen bases at second base. If he's going to give you single digits, probably more like a 25 homer guy than 30 homer guy. It's going to score a lot of runs. So like, I'm not saying I have Marcus Semien as a top 5 second baseman, top 5 second baseman. Like I do think if I don't get Albies, I'm happy to take Semien, fill that weak position with the guy who I'm giving a 7 on the bounce backometer or whatever we're calling it. But I don't know that the ceiling anymore is where you want it to be for a top 5 player. If he's not going to be a help in steals and not going to be a help in batting average, in fact going to be a hindrance in both, I don't know that there's enough else there to say, okay, he's top 5 by default at second base, but is he really top 5?
Is that a Bruce Bochy thing?
I was just going to say, like, I will point out it
has not slipped at all.
And it's not for a lack of athleticism. He's still 81st percentile in sprint speed, which is like right in line with where he's been each of the past handful of years. So it kind of feels like a Bochy thing. And I don't know, maybe it was just by design. It kind of worked out that way. I don't think he bounces all the way back to like 20 steals, but I still think he could give you like 15.
Well, Bochy's still there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's why I'm at. Marcus Semien still rates out as an elite defensive second baseman, one of the best in baseball. Would probably be the best if Andres Jimenez wasn't there. Still just as athletic by the measures that we typically look at, sprint speed, stuff like that. The bat doesn't seem to have slowed down much, so it just he could steal 20 bases again. If they want him to. I just don't know if they want him to.
Well, I don't know if he wants to either, is the thing. Like, stealing bases hurts. I remember Whit Merrifield talking about this in the second half. It was a disappointing year for him stolen base wise, and he just stopped running in the second half. And he said,
and it was like a year
I just didn't feel like it. We were out of it. Why put myself through that kind of thing? Like, it's stealing base is a young man's game. I'm not saying older guys can't steal bases, but I think they think about it a lot more. They hesitate more with it.
Let's talk about Luis Robert, and this is a tougher one. His ADP last year was 32. It's all the way down to 84. Kind of up in the air because he could be traded, and if that happens, it's very likely to a better team than the White Sox, and as a result, the ADP will climb quite a bit. But as things stand right now, obviously Robert took a huge step back. The batting average fell. The OPS went from 857 dropped 200 points all the way down to 657. He's had trouble staying on the field. I don't really know what he bounces back to. Like, his career, he's kind of succeeded in different ways. He stole a bunch of bases this past season. So I don't really know what he bounces back to. So, Scott, I will throw it your way. 1 to 10 on the bounce back meter. Luis Robert.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. This is Chris's guy. I feel bad taking it. I'm going to go 6. I probably would bump it up if he's traded. But it's just such a dreadful situation with the White Sox. They're probably going to trade away their best play. If Luis Robert isn't traded, Garrett Crochet almost certainly is. And so it's only going to get worse. It's not like they have this great backlog of talent in the minors ready to liven things up. Luis Robert is just running out the clock there. And he wasn't, obviously he missed a lot of time with injuries. He tends to miss a lot of time with injuries, but even when he was healthy, he just wasn't ever that impactful.
Oh, he was
for fantasy.
Last year.
And I don't think the skills have diminished, so I'm not sure what to make of it. Was it just that, okay, he wasn't feeling right for a long stretch of the season, never got enough time to get going, didn't get those reps? Maybe, but again, you can't count on him to get an abundance of playing time any year. And then, like, even if he does, the run in RBI production is going to be so lacking because that team is clearly losing 100-plus games again. And I have Luis Robert 22nd among outfielders for next year, which is kind of the last before you get into the Brian Reynolds, Spencer Steer types that are clearly not top tier players. So I'm giving Luis Robert that chance of bouncing back, which is why I went 6. But I'm pretty confident somebody's going to outbid me for him because I'm pretty sure Chris, for instance, is higher than a 6.
I'm growing a little more cautious about my Luis Robert ranking. Like now that I'm starting to finalize things, he's more like 19 at outfield, so we're not as far apart. He's a top 70 player for me overall, so I'm higher than his current ADP, and I'm mostly operating under the assumption that he gets moved. There has been some reporting that suggests that the White Sox are, I think, rightly viewing him as the kind of player that you need to be bowled over to move.
That's why
opposing teams are apparently not offering them that kind of thing.
I feel like there's that impasse, which is why, because he's signed through this year, and then he has team options for 2026 and 2027.
Very like 18 million or something. Very reasonable.
So there isn't the same urgency to move him as Crochet, especially coming off a down year where his stock is low. That's why I'm ranking him as if he won't get traded. He could, but I'm right now operating as if he won't.
And look, the other thing to keep in mind is like he stayed healthy in 2023, kind of. It's kind of like Tyler Glasnow last year, where like, oh, he got to a career high in innings, but it's like he suffered a significant injury. It just so happens that the injury happened at the end of the year. Luis Robert, it was a sprained MCL, I think, in 2023, but it happened in September. So he still got to 145 games. He stayed healthy until then. If that happens in May, he probably plays 100 games again in 2023. So there's a lot that can go wrong for Luis Robert. There's a lot that can really, really go right. And I think he does have, if he went 35-35 this year, I wouldn't be surprised.
He has that kind of upside, and we were drafting him as if he had that kind of upside not long ago. Mm-hmm. Here's another point to bring up that kind of bolsters my point about him just not being as into it.
Yeah.
Strikeout rate over the last 4 years, his first extended year, 2021, 20.6 strikeout rate. Big improvement from his rookie season. Following year, 19.2. 2023, 28.9. Big jump. And then last year, 33.2, which is kind of untenable. And to me suggests, he's frustrated up there.
And I hate like armchair psychology stuff with sports because like we don't know these guys. I don't want to assume anything, but like his zone swing rate went from 78% in 2023 to 73% last year. His chase rate went from 41% to 36%. He also just stopped swinging, even though he wasn't getting pitched at. Like this wasn't a situation where he was the only player in the lineup and they just stopped throwing him strikes. His rate of pitches in the zone was basically identical. It was within a point. So I kind of buy the, frankly, reasonable view that Luis Robert was too good to be there last year and he wasn't particularly motivated. And I'm hoping that he gets traded. I will be a 7 if he gets traded. I will be a 6 if he doesn't. So I'm with you, Scott, on that one.
All right.
Let's talk about 2 Blue Jays here, Kevin Gausman and Bo Bichette. So Gausman's ADP last year was 37, and it's all the way down to 151. Bo Bichette was 38, and now it's all the way down to 144. So huge drops for both of these guys. Kevin Gausman, he had that shoulder injury in the spring right before the season started. Maybe that affected him more than we thought. The velocity dropped off a little bit. The strikeouts went way down for Kevin Gausman. And then Bo Bichette just dealt with, 2 bad calf strains. He had neck spasms. He had a bruised forearm, a fractured finger towards the end of the season. So it's like what could go wrong did go wrong for Bo Bichette this past season. He's also turning 27 in March. He's entering a contract year. So, could be some extra motivation there. I'll split these two up. Who wants Gausman?
Can I get Gausman?
You could have Gausman.
I wanted Bichette, so that works out perfectly.
Chris, 1 to 10 on Kevin Gausman.
So I'm writing about him for tomorrow's newsletter. I'm doing it slightly differently. I'm doing a chances of a comeback with a percentage because, that's way different. It's very scientific. And I will use the same scale. How I'll convert it to a bounce back O-meter. 1.5. I am extremely out on Kevin Gausman. He is my 211th ranked player in my overall rankings right now. And I would guess that's like a outside the top 70 pitcher or starting.
191 for me.
The biggest thing, and look, maybe I think this is one of those ones where it's like, how can you say he wasn't healthy when his velocity wasn't down that much and he made 31 starts? And it's like, you can be healthy enough to pitch and not healthy. And I think that's probably where Kevin Gausman was last year. Like, you see it in his arm slot. It dropped a little bit. That's something you see a lot when pitchers aren't 100% healthy. And that might be something where he has to compensate by lowering his arm slot. He can maintain the arm speed. But what happened to Kevin Gausman last year is the shape of his pitches and his command was just not nearly the same. Even though his walk rate wasn't up, he threw way more of his fastballs middle, and low. And his splitter did not have the same depth to it. He was getting about 2 inches less of vertical break on his splitter. And that's the ball game for Kevin Gausman. It always has been. He needs to pitch north-south to be effective. He needs to put the fastball high. He needs to make the splitter look like the fastball until it drops off the bottom of the table. And you see it in the whiff rate. It went from 43.2% to 33.5% last year. It was still an effective pitch overall. But if you're not generating chases, if you're not generating whiffs with a splitter especially, this is the thing that's really tough about splitters. It's really hard to throw it for strikes. Most pitchers can't. And Kevin Gausman didn't really ever throw the splitter for strikes. He throws it out of the zone and guys think it's the fastball and they swing over it. And it's a really effective pitch for him. But when he's lowering the arm slot, the pitch doesn't move the same. It doesn't have the same depth. Maybe he gets it back. I don't want to bet on a 34-year-old bouncing back that way. Not when there are this many pitchers that I feel good about. I don't know. I could see it happening, but you go from a 31% strikeout rate to a 21% strikeout rate, going from elite to legitimately below average as a 33-year-old. The number of guys who get that back is pretty slim. Off the top of my head, Justin Verlander, I can't think of too many others who have done that. So I think age, I think skill, everything points to decline for Kevin Gausman.
Scott, Bo Bichette on the bounce back O-meter.
First, just real quick, I want to say I more or less agree with Chris. I think there's a chance that the injury early on screwed up Kevin Gausman, and he had to compensate, and maybe he can get back the former arm angle. But a pitcher in his mid-30s, when he shows that kind of swing and miss decline, I'm probably going to bet against him. As for Bo Bichette, it's funny. The last couple years, I've been the downer on Bichette. I've been trying to steer people away from him, and he tended to be still a top 3-4 round pick, at least in roto leagues. This year, it looks like everybody's out on him. His early ADP on an FBC is 144. I'm at 72, so I'm twice as high on Bichette as the consensus. And 72 is a big downgrade from where we're used to seeing him drafted. So I thought I was in the clear, but it seems like people are just just decided he's done, and I don't really see that. Obviously, he had a terrible year, but when I dig into the skill indicators, I don't see a lot of reason for pessimism there. He did have ongoing calf issues this year that I suspect had are partly owed to his bad production. He has kind of tended the past couple years to be more and more opposite field minded, which I think has compromised his power. That's some of the argument I had been making against him the past couple years. He also doesn't run as much. So I don't know that he's going to bounce back as this power speed threat. But I think there's a good chance the batting average bounces back. He'd always been a reliable 290, 300 type of hitter. And I think he could absolutely still be that. And if he stays healthy and he's doing that, he probably gets back to 20 homers at least and is a must-start shortstop again. So
You want a hot take?
Prime of his career, a guy who had been so reliable until last year. I'm going to bet on a bounce back with like an 8. But yes, your hot take, Chris.
Ooh, an 8. All right, Chris.
9.
Yes.
Bo Bichette goes 2020 this year.
Wow.
That's going to be one of my bold predictions.
So
Contract year, he's the athleticism has slid for sure. I don't think there's any question about that. But that's one of the things you see in contract years. We saw it with Willie Adames this year. I think we're going to see a much more aggressive Bo Bichette on the base paths. I think he's going to get back to hitting 290. I have him right in the same range as Scott. I think I might just have to move him down just so I draft other shortstops. Like if I rank him 74th where I have him currently, that might just be too much Bo Bichette on my teams.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I feel quite confident that we're going to see a much better version of Bo Bichette.
I also kind of feel like early ADP, this is one of the downsides to early ADP. One is that it's all coming from one source. And so the peculiarities of that format are weighing heavily on it. But the other thing is there's a lot of copycat right now. It's just Bo Bichette keeps going 144th there or thereabouts because that's where he keeps going.
Yeah.
But then when you get a lot more voices chiming in, I don't think the people actually drafting Bo Bichette 144th believe he's the 144th best player. So I do think he's going to come closer to where we have him ranked, Chris, but maybe not all the way.
There was someone I was looking at. Bobby Miller, who I guess we're not talking about here, but I did write about my bounce backs. And is he on the list?
No, I only included players who were drafted inside the top 60.
Okay, he wasn't quite there. He's like 404 in this very early ADP. And like you said, the peculiarities of the format, most of the drafts that are happening right now are these like draft and holds or gladiators, like these drafts where that's your team for the whole season. Like I drafted one. I think, Frank, you've done one where you just draft 23 players and that's the team you have the whole season. And so in that league, I don't know if I want to take Bobby Miller. I don't know if I want Bo Bichette to be my shortstop there. But in a league, in a 12-team league where you have more flexibility and you have a more robust waiver wire or a waiver wire at all, I think Bo Bichette is a very strong bounce back candidate.
So we mentioned already multiple times, the ADP for Bo Bichette for next year early on is 144. In one of those drafts I did, I got him at 162.
I mean, that's just ridiculous.
As my middle infielder, I already had Lindor as my.
Did Anthony Volpe go ahead of him? Like, what is
yes.
Like, I'm sorry. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
The blind faith, like guy still in his prime, contract year, just kind of like blindly draft that guy. The one pushback, I guess, against myself is that there might just fundamentally things wrong with his right leg because he's had lots of injury to his right leg, like patellar tendonitis in his knee, strained right quad, and now he just had 2 right calf issues. So like there could be like some compensation issues there, and maybe his right leg is just shot. Like that could certainly be on the range of outcomes here. I'm still kind of just blindly betting that he's going to get back on track.
Ages 21 to 25. The lowest Bo Bichette ever hit was 290.
Yeah.
And so in his age 26 season, he has a misstep after that kind of build up. I'm going to bet on the larger sample, especially given the calf injuries influence.
Come on, we're taking Ezekiel Tovar 3 rounds ahead of Bo Bichette. No.
I think it goes back to what you're saying, Chris, is that people just expect Tovar to be on the field,
but
and maybe not. So.
You know who's going 36 picks ahead of Bo Bichette to poke a hole in that theory is Matt McLean, who didn't play last year. Come on.
So you heard it here first. Draft Bo Bichette in 2025. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll hit some news and notes and the rest of our bounce back candidates right after this.
If you love football, this is the best time of the year.
This is as big as it gets.
The stuff of absolute dreams.
Welcome back in. Some quick news and notes. The Red Sox signed Aroldis Chapman to a 1-year, $10.75 million deal on Tuesday. Chapman will be 37 years old on opening day. The ratios took a hit last season, but he still strikes out as many as any reliever out there. 98 strikeouts, were 7th among relievers. And I will ask you guys an impossible question here on December 5th. Who will lead the Red Sox in saves next season?
I will take Aroldis Chapman. If I have to name one person, I will take the field if I'm allowed to do that. Am I not allowed to do that? Aroldis Chapman.
Well, I wasn't gonna take quite the field, but I was gonna say somebody who's not there yet. Among their options now, Chapman would be my choice to close. But I think there's a reason why the last 2 years the team he's been on didn't really want him to close. And he walks a lot of guys, still misses a lot of bats, but not as overpowering as he used to be. And I think there's a good chance they bring in a Kirby Yates or bring back Kenley Jansen or something like that. And if it is Jansen, it may be more of a mix and match kind of thing. But it's possible Chapman's the closer because right now he appears to be the best suited for the role.
And for the record, I did look at Leon Hendricks' rehab assignment, StatCast data. He was averaging like 91, 92 with his fastball. So, if he comes out in spring training and looks great, I could see him taking back that role. But I think right now you have to bet on Chapman.
Yeah. The only other name I would have mentioned was Justin Slayton, who doesn't have closer experience, but just had a really good season in the Red Sox bullpen this past year. The Red Sox also have other lefties in their bullpen, so they don't just need Chapman to be that lefty specialist. That's something that also helps his case for getting saves next season. Korean infielder Hae-Sung Kim, no relation to Ha-Sung Kim, was posted for MLB teams on Wednesday. He'll be 26 years old in January. He's a career .304 hitter in the KBO, coming off a season with 11 homers, 90 runs scored, 30 steals, and 841 OPS. For context, the previous 2 hitters to come over from Korea, Jung-Hoo Lee, Ha-Sung Kim, they put up much better numbers in the KBO. So I don't want to say that Hae-Sung Kim can't be a great player, but I think the chances are he might just give a little bit of batting average and some speed.
Ha-Sung Kim had a 199 isolated slugging percentage in his time in the KBO. Hae-Sung Kim had a 99. That's less than half.
Yeah.
And Ha-Sung Kim has become a 136 ISO guy at the major league level. So yeah, I think I don't want to say best case scenario, but the non-2022 version of Andres Jimenez is kind of what I'm hoping for, where could steal 30 bases as an everyday player. He's a very good defender by all accounts, very fast.
I was going to ask because
he's won a couple of Gold Gloves out there.
If he wasn't, I'm not sure he'd even be in line to start for a major league team. This Hae-Sung Kim.
Yeah.
Ha-Sung Kim.
No relation.
It's going to be fun to make that distinction throughout the year.
But what Andres Jimenez did last year, 252, 9 homers, 30 stolen bases, that feels like a reasonable expectation if Kim is an everyday player.
I think even less power. Like you said, I mean, he had a lot in the KBO. Maybe it could be 5 to 7 home runs, but we'll see. Based on what I've heard about his fielding, he probably will get a chance to start somewhere. So
there is, I think they've had a similar Dead ball. No. Offense is still okay in the KBO. 772 league OPS last year. So, yeah. So I was wondering if maybe there were some adjustments to be made there, but no, I expectations shouldn't be super high, I would say.
Again, the name there is Haesung Kim, and I think for deeper leagues, AL, NL only, depending on where he winds up, we shall see. Blue Jays GM Ross Atkins said Jordan Romano is expected to be fully healthy entering next season. He added that it was a mutual decision for both sides to allow Romano to explore the open market, and apparently the Blue Jays are still heavily pursuing a reunion with Romano. Dodgers reliever Evan Phillips is feeling, quote, fine and should be ready for spring training after he dealt with arm fatigue in the NLCS. The Dodgers bullpen feels pretty open for saves right now. There's obviously Michael Kopech. I still think there's a pretty good chance they either bring back Blake Trinan or bring in another veteran to kind of muddy the waters there. Dalton Varsho might not be ready for opening day following right shoulder surgery that he had in September. Trevor Rogers has been training at Driveline Baseball this offseason in hopes of regaining some velocity. This past season, he averaged 91.9 on the fastball. Back in 2021 and 2022, when he was at his peak, it was 94.5. So this will be a name to watch in spring training. He has a long way to get back to where he was before, but if he comes out firing 95 miles per hour, there will be some sleeper appeal there with a Trevor Rogers. So just keep that in mind. Rangers GM Ross Fenstermaker, that is a great name, confirmed that Kyle Higashioka and Jonah Heim will split catcher duties in 2025. The stove feels like it's starting to heat up as we inch closer to the winter meetings, which start up this Sunday. Specifically, the Juan Soto talks, they're also starting to heat up. Offers have now exceeded $600 million, and ESPN's Alden Gonzalez reported Soto could sign by the end of this week, so stay tuned. We'll have an emergency podcast whenever that happens. And per John Morosi, the Cubs and Reds are among the viable candidates to acquire Garrett Crochet this offseason. I don't know that the Reds would
I wouldn't love that.
Be the best landing spot for Garrett Crochet, but I think the Cubs would be pretty good. And the Padres apparently are a strong contender to sign Roki Sasaki, which we all just kind of assumed it was the Dodgers, but obviously the Padres, they have some ties. They have Yu Darvish, so we'll see where Roki Sasaki signs up. Before we get back into bounce back candidates, it is time to talk about. All right, we'll just quickly mention because maybe some people haven't heard of what's going on here, and I don't think it's going to happen, by the way. But this golden at bat rule that's kind of made waves on the internet, and everyone's so angry about, and I completely understand why. If you don't know, this is a rule that's being discussed, whispers about it. Each team could choose.
Disgust is a good word for
it. Each team could choose one at bat in every game to send his best hitter to the plate, even if it wasn't that guy's turn to hit. So it completely changes everything about baseball. But I think it's a fun concept for an all-star game, a tournament, something like that. But major league games,
it's not going to happen.
What are we doing?
And what if your number 3 hitter makes an out in the 9th inning? Can you send him back up?
Yes.
What are that?
Yes.
Well, theoretically 2 at bats in a row, and they haven't sorted. They're not that far into the discussing it that they've worked out those details, which tells me this was Rob Manfred floating out a trial balloon to see the kind of response it would get, and the response has been intensely negative, rightfully so. I see it as a wisdom of repugnance situation where if I try to explain what's bad about this, it sort of undercuts the point, because it's just there are so many things. It is so disruptive to the core tenets of baseball that to fixate on any one, I think, like I said, kind of undermines the whole point. And so we all get it. It's yucky. We don't want it. And I don't think I think the trial balloon has failed.
I'm going to quote one of the best television shows I've ever seen, Andor, Disney Plus's Andor. The pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident. That's what they're doing. They're throwing this out there to confuse us and get us talking about something that's never going to happen so they can slide some other dumb thing in that's slightly less offensive.
Look, I want to be
my take.
I want to be fair here because
Don't be fair.
No, I want to be fair. I
Don't
think
be fair to Rob Manfred.
There have been huge changes in
I
baseball.
I think a lot
years.
of the changes have been very good.
And most of the time when I heard them initially, it made me uneasy. Like the idea of the game having a clock, it doesn't really have a clock. It could still technically go on forever. But, there is a time limit for players to do something now. And that was always like a sacred thing. You couldn't get baseball's the game without a clock. And so, of course, it made me uneasy to hear it at first. And it made a lot of people uneasy. But like as soon as we saw it implemented, almost universally, even old crusty commentator types were like, oh, yeah, this is better. The game became so much more watchable in 2023 between that and the renewal of the stolen bases with the disengagement limits. And so, like, I want to give some deference to that. His instincts have been mostly good with these things.
This one's bad.
This is more than just making me uneasy. This is just awful. Yeah. And like I said, it doesn't sound like it's far enough along yet that like it's definitely going to happen. And I ultimately don't think it will.
Go away, Golden at Bat. Come back to us. Bounce back candidates. We have 8 players to talk about in 10 minutes. So you will each get 1 player per minute and give us your thoughts. Let's start with Zach Gallen, whose ADP last year was 43. It's down to 115. Obviously, we saw a big rise in the whip and the walk rate. Those were a problem this past season. And we will start with Scott. Yeah. What depend on the bounce back-o-meter for Zach Gallen? You are on the clock for a minute.
I'm going to say that's an even 5 for me. For Zach Gallen, I have him ranked outside my top 30 at starting pitcher, which is still surrounded by some good pitchers, but it's going to surprise people just given where Zach Gallen has historically ranked. Part of it is what is he bouncing back to? Because 3 of the last 4 years now, he's had an ERA in the mid 3s to low 4s. And so are we putting too much emphasis on his early career? Are we putting too much emphasis on that 2022 season when he was the 5th runner-up for Cy Young in the NL, 4th runner-up? I think there was a lot of weirdness in the second half for Gallen that is hard to explain, and he's had elbow issues like ligament sprains in the past, and I wonder is that at play? Because anytime you see weirdness in a pitcher's performance, that's hard to explain. A lot of times it manifests as injury later. But I think even if that's not the case, even if that's a red herring, I just don't know that Zach Gallen deserves to be treated like we've been treating him the past couple of years.
You can't keep getting away with it.
Scott, you exceeded your minute. You can't keep getting away.
Barely. I had a timer going. It had beeped for like 5 seconds.
Let's talk about Adolis Garcia. His ADP last year was 43. He's all the way down to 136. He had that huge 2023. He won the World Series. He was awesome in the postseason. This past season put up a dud. The ADP took the OPS took a huge step back. The power also took a step back. Had some knee troubles, so perhaps that's lingering a bit here. Chris, you are up. The bounce back o-meter on Adolis Garcia.
Yeah, I think the biggest distinction here is like we're talking about Bichette, right? He turns 27 a couple days before the start of the season, I believe. Adolis Garcia turns 32 right around the same time. And so that's the biggest thing. It's just it's so much easier to buy a bounce back for a 27-year-old than it is for a 32-year-old, especially one like Adolis Garcia, who posted the worst quality of contact metrics of his career. Actually, not the worst strikeout rate, but still pretty bad. The lowest sprint speed of his career by far. He was down to, I think, 36th percentile. It just all points to a guy who's not the same physically. And he was always kind of dancing on a knife's edge with his skill set. And he would go through these stretches where he was really good. He would go through these stretches where he was really, really bad. I'm going to put a 2 on this one. I think he's just an all or nothing slugger who steals the occasional base now.
Look at that. A minute on the dot. I know you're timing yourself.
I had a timer going.
I see you doing it. I do worry about the knees again for Adolis Garcia. He has now sprained patella tendon in both of his knees to kind of like towards the end of the last 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Randy Arozarena. His ADP was 44, not 144. 44 last year. It's down to 128. It was a pretty typical Arozarena season. He went 20-20 again, except for batting average. The batting average went from 254 to 219. So, Scott, basically, I'm asking, do you think Randy Arozarena can bounce back to that, 250, 260 hitter he's been in the past?
I think he can. I'm not totally sold on the idea that he will, which is why I'm going to put him as a 5 on this meter, same as Gallen, and I'm ranking him in the same sort of middling way. The reason it looks like I'm about 20 spots, I have him 104th in my overall rankings, Arozarena. So it looks like I'm a little ahead of the consensus. And part of it is because he did hit 254 over the final 4 months. So those first 2 months when the ball was carrying the worst, he hit 158. And in the final 4 months, he basically looked like Randy Arozarena. Still managed to eke out a 2020 season for hitting 158 over the first 2 months. And so I've always felt like he was kind of on a knife's edge there. Like the underlying stats didn't really back up the production. And I was always wary of Arozarena. But I feel like everybody has kind of caught up and surpassed me now. And I'm like, well, there's still some things to like here with them. So 5.
Oh my goodness gracious!
Scott, you're in trouble once again. How could you do this?
It beeped for like 2 seconds.
I got you. I'm timing it.
You want a hard out. I see. Okay.
Let's talk about Adley
Cut it
Rutschman.
hard.
Adley Rutschman's ADP was 50 last year. It's down to 66, so it's not a huge drop, but I think people just want to know if Adley Rutschman is going to bounce back. And Chris, to that, you would say?
Yes.
All right, there we go.
No, I mean, on June 27th, Adley Rutschman was hitting 300 with like a 730 OPS. He was having an Adley Rutschman season.
830 OPS.
830 OPS. From that point on, he hit 189. And this is not an arbitrary endpoint. He took a foul ball off his hand while catching. They call him the tools of ignorance for a reason. His quality of contact was way down. Everything, like, it just seems like he got hurt. And he played through it because he's a tough guy. And that's commendable and great, but I think he's going to be fine. A 10, 9. I said I wasn't going to do any 10s, 9. But if you want a dark horse MVP candidate, put a couple bucks on Adley Rutschman. I'm sure he's got super long odds right now. He's the best player on one of the best teams in baseball. Second best player, maybe. I don't know. He's great. I'm zero concerns whatsoever.
These last four players, I will admit, I don't know if they're really bounce back candidates. I don't know what they're bouncing back to, but they are going much later in drafts this year than they were last year. So let's talk about Royce Lewis. The ADP was 50. He's down to 100. So the ADP has doubled through the first half of last season, like just his career up to that point. He played 94 games, hit 303 with a 945 OPS, and then he was awful in the second half. Scott, we know there's an extensive injury history. Where is Royce Lewis on the bounce back-o-meter for next season?
Yeah, this is going to sound like a cop-out. It's another 5 for me, mostly because, like you said, I have no idea what to expect from him going forward. So I'm just going to I'm going to straddle the fence. I'll give the exact numbers. So he's now played 152 major league games in his career, and the final 58 of them, so over a third, 207 with a 620 OPS. That was the longest stretch of health for Royce Lewis as a major leaguer, and it was terrible. And I don't think he's that bad, obviously, but it was hard to believe he was as good as he looked prior to that. In between all the injuries, it was almost superhuman what he was doing. And so I only have him 9th among third basemen for next year, which isn't a particularly deep position. I mean, I'm baking in some injury risk there too. But mostly I'm saying I don't know who he is. I don't know that he has top 50 type upside.
You mentioned he's played 152 career games for Royce Lewis, 268, 33 homers, 104 RBIs, 6 steals, 825 OPS. That would be amazing. I just have no idea if we can get 150 games out of Royce Lewis and he can recapture that form.
That would basically be like I know Nolan Arenado's dropped off, and we don't expect that from him anymore. But kind of what we were expecting from Nolan Arenado in his first few years with the Cardinals.
Those are basically Austin Riley numbers, right? Like
268. I mean, Austin Riley hits better than 268.
Yeah.
It's not a huge
he should.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Cody Bellinger. Another one. It's like bounce back to what? His ADP was 55 last year. It's down to 124. I guess, Chris, I'll ask, is there any chance that he can bounce back to that awesome 2023 version we saw where he hit 307, 26 home runs, 20 steals, and 881 OPS?
I didn't really understand how that happened. So I guess I can't really say no, because he could just do the thing that I don't understand again. And look, like the rumors that he could get traded and the Yankees have been linked to him, like, okay, I could get excited about Cody Bellinger on the Yankees. I think that could work out pretty well, because he no longer seems to have huge raw power anymore. That seems to have gone away. But aiming for that short porch, that could work out really well. I kind of think he's like a dead zone hitter, where like he doesn't quite hit the ball hard enough to rack up a lot of extra bases. He doesn't quite pull the ball enough to hit for power. It's just like, it kind of seems like he's just blah across the board. And I think what he did last year is probably about what I'm expecting. So I'll say a 5, I guess. I don't know.
These last two are a little tougher. Nolan Jones, if you can believe it, his ADP last year was 56. It's all the way down to 242. He followed up his breakout season where he hit 297. He went 2020, 931 OPS with maybe the biggest dud of all. Scott, there were lots of injuries involved here. There was a knee. There were back injuries multiple times. Nolan Jones on the bounce back -o-meter.
I got to say, I'm pretty pessimistic here, and I don't know that I have a super scientific reason for it. I just look at a guy who has strikeout issues, contact issues overall. He has he's had platoon issues. Is that even true? He didn't his good year. Has he had platoon issues? Maybe that's not an issue for Nolan Jones. I look at a guy who the Guardians gave up on and whose prospect stock plummeted when he was in their system. And it's really just that 1 year in Colorado that we're hanging our hat on here, which he followed up with a complete stinker. I'm not sure there's enough positive here for me to give him more than like a 3 on the worryometer now, or on the bounce back-o-meter. Now, is a 3 worth the 240th pick overall? Yeah, sure. No reason not to take that risk given what Nolan Jones showed us in 2023, but I'm not optimistic he'll bounce back to that.
Honestly, doesn't really have big left-right splits so far in his career. The OPS is off a little bit, but very similar batting average so far for Nolan Jones there. And Chris, you will take us home with Josh Lowe, who had an ADP of 98 last year. So I cheated a little bit on this one, but he was all the way down to 166 so far. Another big breakout, and then had a dud and derailed by injury. I mean, the oblique put him on the IL twice this past season. What is the bounce back -o-meter for Josh Lowe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to wonder if he was ever healthy last year, because he had that. It was a hip injury, oblique injury in spring training right before the start of the season. That, that's just a bad foundation for a season. So, look, maybe last year's the fluke and 2023 is the baseline. I thought 2023 was a fluke at the time. I think he's a platoon bat. I think he's probably like a safe source of stolen bases, but how much do we really care about that at this point? Like, he's a guy who's got real contact issues, probably just won't play against lefties. I don't see a ton to be optimistic about with Josh Lowe. Like,
it feels like
he could be a 30 stolen base guy who's not a 0 for power, and those are rare. Mm-hmm. But it seems unlikely that he's a must-start player at any point.
It feels like when Austin Meadows had that huge 2019 and then was terrible the next year. Like, everybody was kind of buying into Austin Meadows as a stud after that 2019. Mm-hmm. And then he fell off the next year, and it's like, well, could he get it back? And the question I have in the case of Josh Lowe also is, are the Rays that committed to letting him get it back? Like, if he played in a different organization that I trusted to play him with regularity, I'd be more optimistic about Josh Lowe heading into next year. But he's kind of just a non-factor. Maybe in a roto league to fill out a 5-man outfield, I'll throw a late round pick at him and hope for the best. But I don't have really any expectations for him next year.
I don't think that he can get back to 2023 levels, but the fact that they're playing in Steinbrenner Field, at short porch and right field, I could see, 250 to 260, 15 to 20 home runs, 25 to 30 steals. It doesn't blow you away, but that could be pretty useful as like a third, fourth, fifth outfielder, something like that. So, and the ADP is 166, so it's not like super
it
low.
could, but I could also see him getting 220 at bats,
Yeah. I just think he was like healthy last year. So I think I'm a little bit more optimistic on
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, he's basically being drafted around Parker Meadows. I think I'd just rather have the guy who was good last year,
For a portion of he was good in the second half when he came back.
Yeah, right. But that's a lot more than Josh Lowe was.
Yeah. Again, I think he was
where I have
definitely healthy, but we'll see. Maybe he's going to be a pretty polarizing player.
I got Lowe around 200.
I have him back to back. I have Meadows 218, Lowe 219.
Okay, so you guys are not getting Josh Lowe, at least based on this early ADP. All right, we got it done. We're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.